Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and this is our web show. If you're not familiar, if you haven't seen an episode of the show before, what's going to happen is, well, today I don't have a guest. Today I'm going to give what I like to call a tiny writing lesson. Today, and then after the short lesson or the interview, I will give updates on the Midwest Writing Center, and then we will have a free write. So, without further ado, today we're going to talk about oral storytelling versus written storytelling. And there are a lot of differences. We're going to talk about what those are, how each one of these is super powerful in its own way, or can be, or ways to best use these types of storytelling. And I'm talking really fast already. My apologies. I want to be really clear. There's not going to be any value judgments here. These are both, I would say these are totally different art forms. I would say that most forms of art have an element of storytelling. That's why I bring on artists of all types. You know, we have ceramic artists, we have visual artists, we had an opera singer. So I want to be clear. I think these are totally different mediums, but they do sometimes, right? We're talking about storytelling specifically. So I'm not talking about verse. I'm not talking about letters or, other things that, kind of have to be written. Verse does not have to be written. Just storytelling. So we're gonna, for most purposes, we're gonna say these are about fiction. They're not necessarily, but that's going to be the primary thing that we're dealing with when we talk about storytelling. So a little bit of history. Oral storytelling is just how humans have always existed, right? Oral storytelling started when language started. I don't know a ton about the history of the origins of verbal language. I'm not going to get into that, but we do know that once we were using sentences, we were telling stories, which is incredible and a whole different topic for me that I could go off about forever. One of my favorite quotes is, "The truth about stories is that's all we are." And I probably should just spend an hour dedicated to that concept because it's so much. It's so big. It's one of the reasons I love story. I love writing so much. But we're not gonna quite go into that today. But it is true. The way that we have told stories, the way that we have told stories has had an impact on our culture. Of course, our culture has had impact on the way we tell stories, but that is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to close out of a distraction here. But both are true. They're not mutually exclusive. They impact each other. We have the way we talk impacts the way we think as much as the way we think impacts the way we talk. So language has had impact on culture as much as culture has had impact on language. It's very cool. And I should probably have somebody on to talk about that. Maybe Carolyn Schneider. She may know. For reference, she was on talking about linguistic pragmatics. And it was really interesting. And I knew nothing about it. And we need her to come on like 4 more times to really explain that. Anyway, so there are two sort of really base storytelling, oral storytelling things that come to mind when we think about storytelling. The first one is folk tales. Those are the things that are passed down, mythologies, fables. Those are the things that are passed down from long before we can document them. That usually there's a moral, there's a message to them. Not always, and there doesn't have to be. But those are the things we usually think of. We think about like sitting around a campfire and in thousands of years ago, telling these stories, and we're learning from them in whatever way. Sometimes like myths existed to explain the world around us, and folk tales are a little bit fable, they're a little bit explanation, and they're a little bit entertainment, which is again, I'm gonna nerd out about like human development about this, but like it's very cool that we got to a point where we could have entertainment. It was not just survival, right? That's very cool. So sometimes, if we've got a fable or whatever, we're trying to teach the children in a way that will appeal to them. But sometimes it's just entertainment, and it's really exciting when we get something like that that lasts, that we're still telling these stories to our children today, hopefully. That's another thing about oral tradition. If it didn't get written down, a lot of the times it's lost, which is really sad. But that's the world we live in. When I am thinking about oral storytelling, I'm thinking about my own personal background, and the stories I was told as a child, and the folk tales of my ancestors. I was going to say my descendants, but backwards, the other way. My antecedents. But of course, no matter who you are, you come from an oral tradition, and that's just human history, right? So probably if you press your parents or your grandparents or some history books, you can find folk tales maybe told orally, if you've got a really cool grandparent, or YouTube, maybe written down. We'll cross over to oral storytelling tradition getting written down eventually, but so everyone has this in our lineage. Everyone has this, so that's very cool too. And then the other thing I said, folktales and myths, stuff like that, are the primary thing we think of when we think of oral storytelling. But we also have the tradition of something crazy happened to me today, and I want to tell you about it. And some people are really good at this, and some people are not so much. And I will tell you, I fall into the not so much category, which is sort of funny for me, because if you give me a story, if you pass me a story that is an oral tradition, right? If it's a story that I have heard told to me, I can repeat it. But if I'm just telling you about my day, it's not going to be very interesting, even if something wild happened. I don't know what that's about. I could probably train myself out of that, but that's the second category of oral storytelling, and the one that we engage with the most. And what's fun about that, what the overlap there is with my with the advent of instant messaging and text messaging, and even email and letters to some extent, but much less extent, because they're slow. I might be in a weird situation and immediately want to tell my friends, and we've got a group chat, and I tell them, and I do it in the same way that I would if they were standing next to me. I would use the same language that I use in daily life to tell a story in writing. So it's a really cool way that technology has allowed us to preserve oral storytelling traditions without our voices. Again, I'm going to go out of order a little bit because it's cool. But as soon as, and it came much later, written language came much later than spoken language. But as soon as we started getting written language, not as soon as, things started slowly, right, with like pictograms, but very quickly, once we had like full written language, it became a class thing. Not everyone was allowed to learn to read and write. Not everyone was able to learn to read and write. Um, so we lost that quite a bit, other than holy texts, right? Which were the only people who were allowed to write and read them were highly educated, often often clergy, of whatever oral tradition or religious tradition they came from. This isn't, I'm not going to pretend I know everything about all written traditions, all written cultures. Um, but that is also how it is today. There are plenty of people who cannot read and write with any expertise today, and that's a class issue as well. Education depends greatly on the area in which the education is provided. Our schools are built as neighborhood schools and receive funding based on the neighborhood they're in. And without getting political about it, I certainly don't intend to do that. That's true. There's also, the people at home who are helping a child to learn to read and write. Maybe there isn't anyone at home, or they don't have that sort of time. So literacy does become a class issue today as much as it started out, almost. Now in the past, I believe that it was in the past, meaning over 1,000 years ago, a lot of it, and this is probably true today too. I just don't really want to be wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing. But it was intentional, right? It was special to be able to. There are cats. You probably know that if you've seen this before. If I'm looking around, it's cats. It was a privilege to be able to interact with God's word, or whatever it is. It took a long time for entertainment to become written. And I would say most of us, especially since we already said we're going to deal with like fiction, most of us engage with literature primarily for entertainment. And that then can include movies and music and video games, right? These are all based on written word and on storytelling. And most of us are engaging with these for entertainment, not for purely information, and not for purely like survival, where we start with that oral tradition, and it's either about survival, right? The fables would be about survival to some extent, right? We don't, go that way because that's how you die. Maybe we don't know why a volcano erupts, but we're going to make up a story about why the volcano erupts so that we know how to avoid the volcano if it erupts, right? Something like that. When we engage with something like news, like TV news, that is both written and oral, right? Somebody has to write out what the broadcast journalists are going to be saying. But they still need to be able to say it conversationally enough for us to, for us to understand in a meaningful way, right? If it's too esoteric meaning hard to understand in fancy terms, in jargon, in inaccessible language, then it's not useful. It's not news. And it used to be, I don't know if this is true anymore, that newspapers too were written at a certain level specifically so that people could engage and understand what they were engaging with. Now, I've gotten a little bit off topic again, but I'm really excited about this topic because, well, we'll get to it. Written storytelling was, of course, a huge privilege from its inception, when it became, there was, right, the religious teachings, which are written, and then there were academic teachings, which were written. And folks then had, a couple of paths they could take if they were literate or if they wanted to be literate. Um, Education, sciences, spreading news, and religion. And again, I want to apologize. This is pretty Western understanding that I have, and I could very well be wrong about cultures that I don't know about. So I want to apologize for that and put that disclaimer out there. So when we did get to entertainment as written stories as entertainment, that was really exciting. It was still pretty inaccessible for most people, but it was a big cultural shift for folks who can read and who can write. To be able to engage with something purely for entertainment reasons says a lot about a culture. The culture is, again, if it's classist, it's a whole different bucket of worms. But a culture that is able to engage with entertainment has free time, is not dying, has education. So that's a really big cultural shift that happened when we got written stories, because anyone can be telling oral stories, right? Anyone can just be talking. You can do that while you go about your work, while you're tending to your chores, or while someone is dying. And you don't need the time to write, and you don't need the time to read for that necessarily. Time is a huge, huge luxury, and cultures that have the opportunity for someone to sit and create entertainment and then also sit and consume entertainment have a lot of that luxury of time. So we're gonna fast forward. We're gonna say, granted, I know 1 in 5 adults in the US, it might be 1 in 4 adults in the US is functionally illiterate. So I want to preface this with that again. Functionally illiterate means, street signs, maybe job applications, I can handle a text message. But as far as reading long texts and understanding them, including a newspaper or a news article, including books, is much harder. And that's an important thing to know. That statistic I got so I'm letting you know it's outdated. I got that statistic in 2013, and it was true of the US. It was, so functionally illiterate, that means reading is not going to be happening. But the reading that I need to do to survive, I can do. There we go. So we're skipping ahead to today with that information in mind. And pretty much all of our entertainment comes from, I would say all of our entertainment, but pretty much all of our entertainment comes from storytelling, even if we engage with sports, right? There's narratives around what plays we're doing or why we care about beating the other guy, whatever it is. But most of our entertainment comes from storytelling. I've already mentioned, movies and TV and comics and video games and of course books. Lots of people who are outdoorsy and some of those athletes maybe don't have a narrative at the top of their mind, but I would say you've got a hard time escaping the narrative surrounding the thing that you're doing. For example, if I'm into hiking, there's a whole history involved in the space that you're occupying when you're hiking. And I would have a hard time believing that doesn't cross your mind while you're doing it. And same with sports. Sports have each, like proper sports that have rules and teams and leagues. There's a story that created that sport, and there's a story that you engage with when you're playing or watching, which is a bit more into that quote that I already mentioned. The truth about stories is that's all we are. I will have to have just a whole episode on that. My apologies for the tangent again. Anyway, today everything we do surrounds story. I also want to include advertising, which is not something we necessarily choose to engage with, but it is everywhere. It's on our wherever you're watching this video, you surely saw an ad as you got to it. And it's billboards and it's on TV, magazines, whatever. Advertising is also storytelling. Sometimes it's about the person seeing the ad. Sometimes it's about the person selling the thing, but it is storytelling. And those are advertisements, movies, video games. Those are written. Those stories are written, where stories surrounding hiking or sports, or traditions, right? The reason that we use, this decoration this time of year, those are passed down, and those are passed down orally. I care about this team because my dad cared about this team. I use this decoration because my grandma used this decoration. I started this tradition because a friend turned me on to it. It's those are passed down orally, which is really fun and strange to think about, right, in the context of story, because we don't dissect our lives that way. And when we look at the way that oral tradition has influenced our lives, I think it seems on the outset like it doesn't. Of course, we engage with myths or folk tales all the time as they're adapted and changed and told to us again and again. There's a theory out there in the world that there are only 9 I made that number up because there's a few stories, or a few of this particular theory. There are only 9 stories that exist in the world, right? Sometimes people say 3, sometimes people say 12. And we just recycle them over and over again with different characters or different twists or different settings. But truthfully, all of the parts of our lives are enmeshed with the oral traditions we've been given. And that's if you're from a family or a culture that puts a lot of emphasis on cultural background, you probably know a lot of the reasons that we, choose this food on this holiday. But if you're a little more separated from it, you may not know. For example, I'm trying to think of a holiday and I've gone blank. Mardi Gras, right? I am not of a French or Creole or South American tradition. I don't know why anything to do with Mardi Gras, except that it precedes Lent. Clearly, I don't even know what other cultures celebrate Mardi Gras and in what way. Lent is a Christian time period that precedes Easter, which is the most important holiday of the Christian calendar, right? And prior to Easter, you are to sacrifice something meaningful, symbolic. Mardi Gras precedes Lent, and as I understand it, we are partying before we give something up. So it's kind of ironic in the sense that the sacrifice is supposed to be meaningful. But if you're not engaged with a culture that celebrates Mardi Gras, you're going to be like me, and you're going to be like, I don't know why those colors. I just don't know why those colors. But if you are part of a culture that observes Mardi Gras, you probably know why those colors. I think they're yellow, green, and purple. That's the extent of my knowledge. So that's the reason I'm talking about this, is that's an example of how oral storytelling is part of our daily life. The other, of course, is like I mentioned, if something crazy happened to me today and I got off from my day and I want to tell you about it right now, that's oral storytelling. And the thing that I'm excited about, of course, is that we can do that in a written form as well, because of the way communication has sort of eclipsed itself. It's shrunken down. It's much more accessible. I can call you. I can send you a voice recording. I can send you a text message, and I'm going to do it all in the exact same way I would if I were just talking to you because you're sitting next to me. And that's the intersection, right, of oral and written storytelling, and it took its dear sweet time to get here. We've always had letters as communication. I talk a lot about the epistolary form, which is letters or diary entries, stuff like that. But those are still much more formal. They're long form, they're full sentences. I would say email falls under the epistolary category much more than a text message does, but probably in email's social heyday, which I'm going to say is the mid-90s, where people are using email for communication of small things, the way we would use a text message or a phone call. It probably was a lot more casual then. Of course, at that same time, we were getting chat rooms and instant messaging, which really eclipsed the email as a social thing. Now I think we all just use email for business reasons. Anyway, that intersection is really cool and really important, and hopefully someone out there is studying it, because it's not me. But we are now able to hold on to the way that we speak when we tell stories, and it doesn't so much matter how important the story I'm telling you is, but it matters that I'm telling you a story about my day, about whatever it is, because that is that's how stories get kept, right? If the story is cool enough, if the story is weird enough, if the story's told well enough, it can hold on beyond today, beyond this text message. And that is how the oral tradition started. Every story was told the first time. And the ones that survived, with the exception of stories and languages that have died, but the ones that survive until today are the ones that were favored, the ones that were told again and again because we wanted to hear them again and again. And that can happen with the event that happened in your day. And it doesn't have to be done formally. It doesn't have to stay because you wrote it down formally. And in fact, may have more staying power because it's told casually, colloquially, with everyday language. That's a very, very powerful thing that we have at our disposal that we have been taught to ignore, right? When we're taught, and I'm a grammar nerd, I'm a language nerd. I don't want to say like, screw it all, but also screw it all. Because when we're taught all of these rules, we lose our ability to use our natural voices in writing. We sit down to write and our brain says, time to be formal, time to follow the rules. And that's just, that's conditioned. That's something that we can unlearn, but we have to do it on purpose. And it's really hard because, you know, you want to keep that part of your brain that says time to be formal when I sit down at a computer, because I need to send an email or whatever. I need to have formal communication for whatever reason. But the reason that oral storytelling, especially if it's starting today, if it's not something that has been passed down for thousands of years, if it's starting today, it has to be told casually and it has to be told honestly. And the honest way to tell that story is however it comes, which is probably why I'm not great at telling the story of my day. Because I don't, process the events in a theatrical or fun way. I'm like, whoa, this weird thing happened, end of sentence. But if you're processing it and you've got the preceding event and you discuss the way your brain would see, I know how to tell a story. I'm just not one for the job if it's in the moment. So I guess we'll get into that. We'll get into how to do it. You want to tell an oral story, you want to do it well, and you're not passing on an oral tradition. Let's talk about the way this story starts. You generally with Oreos, generally with oral storytelling, we've got a day in the life setup. Now, the big thing that makes oral storytelling different from written storytelling is we don't have tons of exposition. We don't have lengthy descriptions. We don't have time. We don't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of space to draw out all the details and paint an intricate picture. We are telling the story right now. So we do a day in the life and we abbreviate it. I don't have a story in mind to share. I didn't prepare that because I thought I'd be able to do this on the spot. And anyway, the stories that are coming to my mind are like not PG. So so they're not gonna get told. Anyway, so we do the day in the life. I was at work minding my own business. My mind was wandering. Maybe not even my mind was wandering. I was at work minding my own business, thinking about the stuff on my to-do list. Now tell me the thing on your to-do list. I was thinking about how I can't wait to get off work because my favorite show is on tonight. My brain is in the 90s. I can't, I'm at work, I'm super stressed, minding my own business, thinking about the huge amount of chores that I have to do at home, but also thinking about, how I am going to get takeout because I deserve a treat, right? Whatever's on your mind when this thing happens. And then the thing happens. You want to draw that out a little bit, but again, we don't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of space. So the details that we want to care about, the details we want to emphasize, they're going to be a little hyperbolic, probably. Someone came in with bright pink Liberty spikes. That's when your hair is like spiky, but really big, like a mohawk, but all over your head. Wearing a ball gown with a parrot on their arm. That can't be the only thing that happens, right? That's not a story. If that's your whole story, you're probably just saying, check out this person who came into my store today. I guess you work in a store. And then they did something, or your boss did something, or the parrot did something. I really should invite someone here to tell me about their day before I do this. And that's, you give me some exaggerated details, real details, preferably, but exaggerate them. Tell me only the strange things about this person who walked into the store. The parrot, the hair, the ball gown. I don't care what they look like. Beyond that, I don't care their gender. I don't care their piercings might be fun. I described a very strange getup, so that's what I've got, right? That's all I need. I'm invested. I'm here. I want to know what Liberty Spikes did or didn't do. Maybe, the next thing that happens is a flash mob. People go all dancing around, but you're in a big box store and there's like no room for dancing and the parrot gets really upset. I don't know. It's your day, not mine. But the point is, give me a little bit day of the life, intense details, hyperbolic details. Show me, but the day in the life is showing me how this thing that happened is different from regular life. Day in the life is regular life, and then something happened to change that up. And then what we're going to do with that, as we're learning to tell a story, is we're going to emphasize the weird parts and we're going to drag out the boring parts. Maybe drag out the exciting parts too. But we're going to drag out the boring parts because we want the exciting parts to be exciting. And that's really how it is. You wrap it up however it wraps up. It's, I suppose, the other thing, if you're just telling a story to your friends, wrap it up when the excitement ends. Don't drag it on after that, because then folks are going to be like, cool, bud. That story was long. I mean, maybe your friends are super nice and don't care about that. With written stories, we can do whatever we want. We have the luxury of time. We have the luxury of space. We have all the pages we have available to us, which could be infinite, right? On a computer, a Word document does not take up much space. I don't own any books that are more than like 1,000 pages. I'm behind my computer here is Norton Anthologies of English and American Literature. So those have like Bible pages, but they're still probably not more than 1,000 pages. You have that luxury. If you have the ability to sit down and write, you have the luxury of time, you have the luxury of space, you have that luxury of editing, which is a huge luxury. And you can make that story more powerful over time by adding details, by adding emotion. And when we're telling a story aloud, the action is really all that matters. The thing that makes it weird is really all that matters. If what you want to do, if the thing that you're trying to capture, you're watching this and I didn't say this would be a how-to, but you're watching this and you're like, okay, but how do I tell folk tales from my people? If you don't have them accessible to you, that's really hard. It'll require practice. It'll require talking to lots of people from your culture, and it'll require, looking at what's documented, which usually means written, and figuring out how that would sound more naturally, how that would sound, however many years ago when it would have been told last orally, and how it would sound today to come out naturally, to come out spoken. Now, the basics of that, which is going to also lead us into your free write, which is good. I gambled today to see if my computer would hold its charge while I did this. This is going to lead into your free write. Today's free write is going to be to write. You don't have to write it. If you don't want to write it, you'll want to record it, either audio or video, but to write a story in oral tradition. And the thing that makes that tricky is really, really hackable. All you have to do is make sure that you're using talking language. We're going to start with once upon a time, long, long ago, in a galaxy far away. The oral tradition that I come from starts with once there was and was not, which is just once upon a time, which is just once. I was really, really bummed when I realized once upon a time is just a long way of saying once. This happened once. So I would start, if I were trying to recreate an Armenian folktale, I would say once there was and was not. Sentences. Now that sounds super formal. That's just keeping with the format that you want to keep with. It's not really formal. It's just a story start. It can be a really powerful one, right? If it is hearkening back, if it is paying homage to a massive and important culture or place or legacy, right? And that's why we keep these story starts. But I wouldn't worry about it sounding formal. It's a tool. Then we go straight into colloquial means casual. It means the way that we talk every day. We go straight into colloquialisms. Once there was and was not a beggar. Okay, maybe I don't use the word beggar all the time. That fits in more with my this is an old-timey story bit. But that's really going to be the last time. It's a beggar and a king and a queen, right? There was a poor family, is probably how I would really do it. Once there was and was not a poor family who just had their first baby son. I used the word just. I said baby son, which is maybe, not my favorite term. I probably, if I had written it down, I would have said they gave birth to their first son. Or maybe I would have said they expected to be barren and they couldn't afford another mouth to feed, but I'm not doing that. I'm telling the story aloud. Once there was and was not a poor family who had just given birth to a see, I can't not so good at the speaking, am I? The really important bits are when you're telling this story, and right, if you're writing down a story that sounds like it's being told orally, you want to include or I mean, or so, or anyway. And the reason for that is it feels more familiar. It feels more familiar when you're reading it, feels more familiar when you're hearing it. If I were just reciting Shakespeare, right? I would just be reciting it. I can't do that. I can do that from my memory. I can express these words. Wrote out of my head, wrote meaning you memorize them by repeating them. But that's not what we're doing. We're telling a story. It is alive while we're telling it. So we want it to be casual. We want it to maintain its life by being part of today, even if it's an old story, especially if it's an old story. I'm moving my hands a lot and my cat is watching me. The cat's right here. So that's the basics. Oral storytelling and written storytelling have totally different demographics for whom they have served, but they should be serving the same demographics today. We have everything at our disposal. This is not audio tapes, right? Or audio tapes, not audiobooks. Those are that's like the Shakespeare thing. Those are someone reading written words. What we want to do, you don't have to. What we want to do is we want to pay homage to the people who kept stories alive for all of human history. And to the people who kept stories alive for all of human history. And we want to continue a tradition that has proven longevity, that has proven meaningfulness. And there is science out in the world to tell you, why oral storytelling matters, and how it enriches you, especially for children with developing brains, and how it's different on your brain to hear or tell a story aloud versus to read or write a story on paper or a computer. Actually, those are different. Paper and computer have different effects on the brain as well. And the big part of that is that they're so human because there's no editing, because they're using everyday language, because it is an immediate connection between me and my audience. That's what makes them powerful, and that's what makes them last. And they have to be good stories, right, to have lasted X amount of time. But also, sometimes he tells you about their day and it's an incredible story. And you tell it to someone else too, because it was an incredible story. And it changes, right? The game of telephone, it changes as it gets told again and again, but the essence is there and the power is there. Every time a story gets told, especially if a story gets repeated, there's power in that. And that power has lasted, has created new power, has created new stories. Very exciting. So coming up at the Midwest Writing Center tomorrow night, we have an info session for our Young Emerging Writers internship. That is 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. at the Midwest Writing Center. So that's the ground floor of the Rock Island Public Library, the downtown branch. They have 3 now, 401 19th Street. I'll be there. This is just informational, just if you want to know what the internship is, you want to tell other people about it, or you're not sure if you want to apply. The internship is open to teens 15 to 19 years old in the Quad City area. So anyone who knows teens, who is a teen, who cares about writing, you're welcome to come and get all that information. We're going to have another one in April, but this one's tomorrow night, March 15th. On Sunday, Nope. Yes, on Sunday, March 19th, we have our collaboration with Nahant Marsh. Madeline Young will be teaching nature writing for youth. That is K through sixth graders that she'll be teaching. She's a naturalist and a writer, really talented at both teaching and at writing, and she's a good time. She introduced me to a snake. She made sure I knew snake safety, so I didn't scare the snake, and so the snake didn't scare me. She's really great. She's good with kids. She's good with nature. And she's good with writing. So that is $15 for members of either the Writing Center or the Marsh. $20 for non-members. Again, that is Sunday afternoon, the 19th, and then April 6th, we will have Ida Zalelian back to teach telling family stories, which is her expertise, 100%. She is an author of a couple of books about families. She's taught with us a couple of times already, and it's been really generative and really great for me personally, but also for the other people who were there. She's a great teacher. She's a professional teacher, storyteller, and person with a family. We will have lots more goodies coming up in the near future, but that's it for the next couple of weeks. I would like you to try your hand at telling a oral story aloud or written. And as always, please write more light into your life.